I get the distinct honor today of introducing John Allen, who is a retired now 4-star general and past deputy commander of the U.S. Central Command. He has served in Afghanistan. He has served in Iran, Iraq. He has, if I listed all of the awards that he has received, he would have to have a wheelbarrow to bring them up here. I don't think they would fit on his uniform. But he's going to be talking about cyber threats to the counties, and I think it's certainly a relevant topic for all of us today. I want to say thanks again for all the work that y'all have done and all the things that are going on out in the country today. I think it's a pivotal time in American politics, and I think, frankly, in my opinion, counties are where the rubber meets the road, and we're the people delivering the services, and we're the guys that are out there making things happen, and without all of y'all, I don't think that would happen. So with that, I would ask General Allen to come up, and we will hand it off. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks very much. My honor. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We on? Great. Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be here with you today. I really am honored to be in your presence because so much of what makes America the great nation that it is, and I've spent a lot of time around the world, is what happens at the county level. It really is, as Brian said, and Brian, thank you for your wonderful introduction. It really is where the rubber meets the road, and it is where the effectiveness of our nation really plays out on a moment-to-moment basis. And in a conference like this, where you have the opportunity to come together, to restore old friendships, to network, to have lessons learned, to just learn new things, it's an opportunity for me, and I want to thank Linda Langston and Mike Griffin for helping me with Brian to have the opportunity to speak to you for a few minutes today. It's an opportunity for me to thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for everything you're doing for our citizens every single day. But I want to tell you something a little bit different than perhaps you might have expected in a briefing at this conference is I have come to believe, and I spent 42 years in uniform, fought in 4 wars. I have come to believe that the great threat to our democracy today is not going to be held at bay by our Marines or our soldiers or our sailors and airmen overseas. We will always fight overseas to keep the enemy at bay. But we have seen now that this enemy can reach into the heartland of America. And we know that this enemy is intent ultimately on striking a blow against the institutions of democracy in America, to try to create a crisis of confidence of American citizens in their democratic institutions and in the process of democracy, our voting. This is quite a revelation to me, having spent most of my time growing up in our Corps overseas, and in Afghanistan for a long period of time, and in Iraq for a long period of time, and ultimately leading Marines in at the very end of the wars in the Balkans, into Sarajevo, when 40-story buildings were still burning. But today, the threat is very real. And today, in so many ways, the U.S. counties are on the front line of democracy. And I truly believe that. So it was important to me to have the opportunity to come speak to you. I'm retired from the Corps now, and I spent 3 years after I retired helping John Kerry with the Middle East peace process. So I spent 13 out of 15 months in the Middle East with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And then when the Islamic State invaded Iraq in the spring of 2014, the president asked me to put together for him a global coalition to fight ISIL. So it's about 45 years of service all told, and I've had a chance to spend a lot of time around the world, and I've seen this cyber threat in action. I have seen it emerge, and I believe it is actually focused on you now, and we have seen that evidence in the last election. So we were going to talk about a slide clicker, okay? Never let a general near a slide clicker. And they have withheld it from me. Sharp objects, computers, slide clickers, and things that explode. It's a long list of things generals never touch. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Now we're going to see if this works. There it does. Okay, can you all see me if I get down here? I grew up in a world where the preponderance of the enemy threat was in the physical sphere. And you know these people. You've seen them before. In the upper left-hand corner, we have what they call the Little Green Men, who facilitated the invasion into the Ukraine and ultimately severed Crimea from the Ukraine in a massive violation of international law. Upper right-hand corner are Chinese special operators, special forces. Had to deal with them in East Asia. Lower left-hand corner was one of the worst problems that we've had for our nation, and that's the image of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps special operators called the Quds Force, Jerusalem Force. In the lower right, you're hearing about these folks all the time. It's the North Koreans. What you're hearing about the North Koreans is primarily about the ballistic missile program. You're hearing about the North Koreans' nuclear program, and they're both quite viable. They're actually quite a threat. But you'll hear in a moment that the North Koreans have a threat that's reaching straight into your counties. And then in the middle, you recognize the black flag of the so-called Islamic State. One of the worst of these organizations that I've ever seen. I had the opportunity to fight Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and ultimately the Islamic State in the Philippines. I had the chance to go up against the Abu Sayyaf. But this organization was unique, and it's unique not just because of the depredations that it brought upon the people that it subjugated, but it is unique in that it has embraced technology in ways we've never seen an organization like this embrace technology. It is also a threat to the U.S. counties. And we call this the 4+1, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and extremist groups. But there's a sixth, and it is transnational organized crime. And as you can see, these arrows go around the world, and these are superhighways for the movement of sex trafficking, guns, money, terrorism, superhighways. But each one of those is also a superhighway of information and data. So we really have 4+1+1, the global criminality on the back of which frequently terrorists move. And what we've discovered today is that with the advent of cyber capabilities, with the advent of something called the cyberspace, the world has become very much a borderless world. America, for generations, was secure behind our oceans and was secure behind our mountains. And when war came to America and when we reluctantly had to take the war to the enemy, we sent our Marines and soldiers and others across the seas. And the Navy would keep the sea lines open for us. And we would fight those wars a long way from the United States. But the nature of the cybersphere today and the cyberspace today means it is a borderless world, and it operates literally at the speed of light. And they can be into your system and gone, regulated by a hostile nation or an advocate group or a surrogate group, and devastate your system and be gone before you know it. It is really, truly a borderless world today in cyberspace. This is where Intel did a great job on this slide. This is what 1 minute of the internet looks like. 1 minute. It's 1.5 gigabytes of information moves in cyberspace every minute. And when you talk about it, you see the enormity of the connectivity in the world today of people with network-capable devices, phones, iPads, notebooks. There's 3.4 or so network-capable devices for every single person on the planet. We can communicate in ways we could never have imagined before. And that's good for education, it's good for medicine, it's good for business, it flattens the world in ways that we all can communicate, but it has also created enormous capacity for those who wish us ill to penetrate our own networks and our own devices and to raise havoc with who we are as a people. So a little bit more on the network and what a minute looks like. This is just some basic statistics from the wheel to the right. Look at that, 150 emails, 150 million emails a minute. This is very interesting, I think. The Apple Store downloads 51,000 per minute in Apple downloads. I'm definitely seeking stuff. Now, what's interesting, and I'm sorry I don't have two lasers where I can go on both sides. This is a very interesting wedge here. And for the ladies and gentlemen in my rear, it says roughly 28 million WhatsApp chats per minute. Now, I don't know how much you all know about WhatsApp. When I ran the global coalition to counter ISIL, WhatsApp is a real challenge for us. Now, for you and me, it means we can conduct business in a completely secure environment, point-to-point complete security. Very difficult for an intelligence service to get into that point-to-point relationship unless they get into your phone. But it is also a platform upon which a great deal of terrorist planning and terrorist execution occurs. So we're very attentive to the volume of what occurs in WhatsApp. That's just a minute in the world today. So we are awash in information, and it's good for us. But the 4+1+1, they're taking advantage of the weaknesses in our systems. Korea. I operated against the North Koreans in the mid-aughts. It is a criminal state. It's not a state as we know it. It's not a state that we can even rationalize. It is a criminal state that has subjugated its own people for the purposes of plundering them, ultimately to keep a very small elite in place. One of the reasons that it's able to stay afloat in terms of economic capacity is its cyber criminal activity. And whether they're coming at us as Bureau 121 or Unit 180, or this organization that's called Lazarus, which is in essence an advocate and a surrogate group that we think is formed out of the military, but it also has privately contracted hackers. It is not an insignificant number of people constantly attempting to penetrate the network. 6,000 personnel, we think, are operating in North Korea in an organized cyber criminal, cyber terror operation. In the upper right-hand corner of that slide, you see what the operations are, some of the big ones. And there are many. These are just some of the big ones. Cybercrime, in this case, where they drained a bank in Bangladesh for $81 million. They conduct massive retaliatory strikes, cyber strikes, against those elements in the West that criticize the great leader, or the new leader, whatever Kim Jong-un calls himself today. And I think we have all seen what happened to Sony. Sony was brought to its knees by the cyber attack, which the FBI was ultimately, through forensic analysis, able to tell had a North Korean origin. But this is the one that I worry about a lot, because I think this is only the beginning, and this is the ransomware attack called WannaCry. Now, our colleague from Symantec made some great points a couple of minutes ago. Let me ask anybody to put their hand in the air. In fact, you probably don't want to put your hand in the air. If you got hit by WannaCry, you remember it. WannaCry is a ransomware attack. For those of you who've never been hit by one, looks like this. Your screen comes up, and what's just happened is typically you got an email. It cajoled you, it intrigued you to open an attachment, and when you open the attachment, the malware was downloaded into your system, and this screen comes up and it tells you that it has taken charge of every file on your computer, and it has encrypted them, and unless you pay a ransom, and by the way, the ransom goes up over time, unless you pay a ransom, you will not get access to those files again, and if you go too long, the files remain locked out forever. Ransomware is a big moneymaker in cyber criminal, but it's also a cyber terrorist act. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the difference between the two is a difference without a distinction in many cases. But I think for the purposes of counties, I would ask you to pull your attention down to bullets 4, 5, and 6. So much that happens in terms of health care occurs at the county level in this country, and hospital after hospital, primarily in Europe and in the UK, were locked out because of WannaCry. Operations had to be rescheduled. That might seem normal, but some people can't afford to have an operation be rescheduled. Patients' health records, all of the medications that they took were all locked out. The next bullet down is that the 25% of India's national police systems were frozen by WannaCry. I think we can imagine what would happen at the county level if the county police force or local police forces within the county had their systems frozen out. Because sometimes you can't unleak or you can't unlock WannaCry as fast as you want. And then, of course, 100,000 computers in Chinese universities. You know, an awful lot of what's great about America today is the education that comes from community colleges. It is something we should all be proud about in America. My daughter ended up going to Virginia Tech, but she did her first 2 years in a community college, and it was a wonderful experience for her. The blow up at the community college level, at the county level, could be severe with a concerted ransomware attack that could be delivered by a state actor or a surrogate that's difficult to determine is in fact a state actor. This is North Korean. When we did the analysis on the code, the forensic analysis on the code for WannaCry, the origins were North Korean code, right into the heartland of America. And of course, our old friends, the Iranian cyber army, maybe the largest on the planet. Primarily, the activities associated with the Iranian cyber army occur with the Basij Cyber Council. If you know anything about the Basij, it is a rabid, mad dog organization that suppresses the aspiration for liberty and human rights and rights for women in Iran. It also has the principal cause for cyber operations. We think there could be as many as 150,000 individuals engaged in this process. And a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranians is the Syrian Electronic Army, which is targeted against Western media who write difficult things about Bashar al-Assad. And then, of course, we have these friends, Chinese Unit 61398. It is one of the most active cyber units in the world. It has been primarily involved in economic cyber crime and the exfiltration of unclassified information from American contractors associated with the Department of Defense. So if you look at the map of America, each one of those red dots is where someone got hit, where we could actually determine that they had been hit by a Chinese cyber intrusion or a Chinese cyber attack. As you can see by the slide, 141 organizations in the world were hit. 115 of them were American, most of them high-tech. And when the Chinese unveiled last year their stealth fighter, no one should be surprised to learn that it looks just like the American F-35. And we can trace it back to the particular attack that occurred. It's so virulent that the United States has actually issued warrants for the arrest of 5 Chinese officials associated with this particular organization. So I'm sort of working my way through the 4+1, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the +1. That's a screenshot off Central Command's unclassified computer system where the cyber caliphate of the so-called Islamic State penetrated into the Central Command. So even the extremist non-state actors have the capacity to penetrate into the American cyber networks. And if they can get inside the Cyber Command or get inside the cyber network of the Central Command, I think they could get into a lot of other places. And then, of course, the criminality that I discussed early along in the transnational criminal problems. In the world today, if all of the countries in the world constitute 100%, about 80% of the world's cyber crime occurs in 20 countries, with almost a quarter of the world's cyber crime directed against the United States. No surprise, we have the greatest penetration into the internet network. If you see that the cyber minute flows in virtually every country, it flows most broadly and most strongly in the United States. And that's where it's difficult for us to determine the difference between cyber criminality and cyber terrorism, because the effect might be the same in the end, but the reason for the cyber intrusion or the cyber attack, in fact, was different. So I wanted to try to paint for you one of the challenges that we face in the world today. Because as these individuals become, these countries and these non-state actors become more capable, they're going to attack us more frequently. And the reason is because there aren't buildings blowing up. There aren't bodies in the streets. A lot of Americans don't understand the risk that we currently exist within. Yet the effects of cyber and cyber intrusion and cyber attacks can be enormous. And frankly, this picture makes my blood run cold. His Excellency Vladimir Putin with the Supreme Leader Khamenei of Iran. And we now know, of course, as a direct result of last year's investigations and the continued forensics by our intelligence system, the Russians were deep inside our cyber system, the cyber-based voting system of the United States, deep inside the system. And we're not really sure how long they've been there. I think for those of you who are conscious of cybersecurity, who live in that world, IT specialists, I'm sure many of you are in this room, what we discover is that there are often hundreds of days that pass between the actual penetration into your network and your ability to actually detect that penetration. And that's a real problem. So we know the Russians were, in fact, in the system. Our intelligence community has assessed with high confidence, and the term high confidence for our intelligence community is as great a sense of surety that you're ever going to get on anything. That not only were the Russians in our system, but the Russians were ordered into the system by Vladimir Putin himself. Now, this is an eye chart, and I apologize to you in advance, and I'm going to take it apart for you very quickly. Over here, if you see my laser going up and down, everything to the right of my laser is the information campaign, the systematic strategic information campaign waged by the Russians. Over here on this side, everything over here is the planning of fake news and the echoing of fake news with bots and the echoing of fake news with probably about 1,000 to a 2,000 person troll army that did nothing but comment on people that they believed were online, comment on people they believed to be a threat, and also continued to echo and retweet various information. That's the right-hand side. The left-hand side of the Russian penetration of our system is the covert portion. So if you come down from strategy in the north, and then you go into cyber operations, what you then find is down the lower left-hand corner of this slide, and it's not in the lower left-hand corner because it's unimportant, but in the lower left-hand corner of this slide indicates that part of the intention of the Russian program was to ultimately penetrate to the lowest level of the cyber networks associated with the voting system in the United States. And I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room that that voting system is the platform on which the American democracy finds its purpose and its identity. The Russians know that, and they came for the system last year. So we don't really know how big this is. Patient zero was in Illinois. In Illinois, they detected aberrations and anomalies in their system that just seemed completely unusual and called in some help to try to do some forensics and diagnostics. But by the time they were able to get some sense that they'd been penetrated, as much as 90,000 records in their voter database had been corrupted or exfiltrated. Now, 39 states we think were penetrated. That's 78%, almost 80% of the U.S. states were penetrated by the Russians to get into our electoral system. The night before the election, 120 electoral officials in the United States had their email systems hacked. And I'm sure everybody in here is okay with that. But I'm telling you, when they hack your stuff, and they have your stuff, and they start dribbling it out, my guess is probably there are business relationships, there's betting on the Redskins. I mean, it's just kind of unusual. But there's all kinds of things that people don't want to have get out. But 120 electoral officials had their email hacked by the Russians the night before the election. So we don't know what the full extent. We don't know how broad this is. We may find that it's more than 39 states. And we hope it's not this. We don't at this point think that the Russians actually manipulated the numbers. There was some theory that early along they attempted to penetrate. They were testing the system to see if they could alter the numbers in the electronic systems. But I think the warning that President Obama gave, plus early detection, they backed off. Because that is a direct attack upon the United States. I could argue that anything they did was a direct attack upon the United States. But this is where we live, ladies and gentlemen. This is where our democracy finds purpose, is the electoral system, and it exists and it lives at the county level. an awesome responsibility for you, frankly. But it's not just any longer the electoral system, because there are aspects of strategic and critical infrastructure that also exists at the lowest levels of government in the United States. And I worry about the healthcare system. I worry about our hospitals. As I said, I was very concerned about our community colleges, although that's probably not critical infrastructure. The term SCADA stands for Sensor Control and Data Acquisition. These are generally autonomous systems that are computer-based that will open or close sluice gates on a dam, that will move a track to keep trains from having head-on collisions, that can dump wastewater into freshwater if it operates at the wrong time. And when you can get into the SCADA systems, you have real capabilities to change schedules, ultimately to create vulnerabilities, and real capability, which is a public safety issue that we've not seen before. And we know that the Russians penetrated some of our critical infrastructure last year. Again, my sense is, years in doing some of this myself, these are reconnaissance efforts. They don't go where we're strong. They go where we're weak. They go where they think we're not looking. They go where they can test the system and sense that it is undefended. And often if they do, they'll plant beacons into the system that will beacon back to them and let them know that the system remains vulnerable. So from my perspective, if I were doing this, I would be setting the conditions over a long period of time to be able to take advantage of the American critical infrastructure cyber network and our voting capabilities against the day when Russia and the United States has a physical confrontation, and taking down our critical infrastructure is one of the first moves that we detect in the war between the U.S. and Russia. It is not at all far-fetched to believe that we call it preparation of the battle space is underway right now. So we've seen these threats before. Advanced persistent threats where nations, non-state actors, surrogates will focus multiple tools upon what they think might be our weak spots or our vulnerabilities with the idea of achieving some effect or another. A zero-day attack is, of course, where the malware is produced in that particular day. And signature-based cybersecurity, signature-based cyber protection, which relies for its capability on updates, periodic updates, the zero-day attack occurs, if it occurs between the last update and the next update, they're in your system. That's the problem with a zero-day attack. And then we have something called polymorphic attacks. That enormous river of 1 minute of data per minute, per hour, per day, that enormous river of information has produced the capacity for the morphing of malware at a level and a speed that we've never seen before. We think that as many as 100,000 pieces of malware are produced a minute in the world. And if you rely for your security upon a signature-based system that has to be updated as we are able to identify malware, classify it, and then send out protective patches, then we're always going to be behind the power curve. And as this slide indicates, we think it's just beginning. Because it's easy for the enemy to attack us in cyberspace. It's an asymmetric attack. They don't have to go strength upon strength. No one is going to take on the United States of America and be able to survive the physical involvement. But what they have discovered now is that in cyberspace, they have capacity to reach directly into the heartland of America. In so many ways, how you defend yourself at the end point is the way to go. I am not doing a product brief here. I'm telling you the reality of the world. The enemy is using artificial intelligence now in an environment that we call hyperwar. Speeds of action and reaction are so fast that for all intents and purposes, the presence of the human in the loop is in fact a vulnerability and not an asset. This is why polymorphic threats are coming at us so quickly and in so many different ways, across such a broad spectrum of the network. So as we think about the kinds of protection we want on our systems, as we think about what AI is doing to create the kinds of threats that can penetrate so deeply into the heartland of America, we also have to think about what artificial intelligence can do and what is known as a cognitive endpoint protection system. A thinking, learning system that sits outside your network and will stop WannaCry even though it's never seen it before. Will stop the Petya malware, which the Russians used to bring the Ukrainians to their knees 2 weeks ago, without ever having seen it before, because it is a learning, cognitive cybersecurity system. So as my colleague a few minutes ago talked about Symantec's systems, I'm not going to talk about a particular product, but I'm going to tell you that if you're thinking about cybersecurity and you're not thinking about a cognitive-based endpoint protection, and you buy a signature-based protection, you better learn how to use the Bitcoin system. So ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your giving me some time today. This was my opportunity, having spent so many years dealing with the enemy, first to come down and pay tribute to you for what you do for America's precious citizens every single day. This is where America is governed. This is what has made our country what it is, what you do every day. When I retired, the enemy was then beyond my reach. When he was within my reach, he didn't like it. But the enemy is beyond my reach now. And I want to thank Linda Langston and Mike Griffin for helping me with Brian to have the chance to tell you today what an old guy, retired out of the Marine Corps, who looks across this body of leaders to tell you that your Marines are still going to continue fighting for you overseas. We're going to continue to have the greatest Navy on the planet. It'll dominate the waves and keep us safe. But there isn't yet a cyber cavalry unit. There isn't going to be a federal cavalry unit that comes over the hills when your system is hacked and you're taken to your knees, or the data has been exfiltrated on all of your citizens, or public safety has been compromised because they're inside your infrastructure. It just isn't there, and it probably isn't going to come. So part of what my purpose is today is to just appeal to you, because you really are the front line of democracy. And we're under attack. Our democracy is under attack. And I think you all will be the people that defend it. Well, we got folks overseas. You'll defend it at home. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Thanks very much. Thank you. I think we may have time for one or two questions. My phone is going crazy here. I get a lot of WhatsApp messages here, so I got to walk out right away and see what people are saying. Yes, ma'am.
So knowing what you know about cyber war, as I think you called it hyper war,
Right.
not even starting on an individual basis, what can we do at home
Sure.
plus work? Do we go back to the old days of the paper technology as you would?
Right.
Do we get out of this internet world and stop with the technology?
No, that's a great question, and there have been folks who've proposed that. What has happened to us because of the Cyber Minute is, for a whole variety of reasons, why we are a nation that is great in so many ways. It has given us the capacity to move, not in a linear sense, towards being a continuously great nation. It has given us, in a geometric or even perhaps exponential capacity, to harness information. We simply can't take a step back from that. Because in so much of what we've done to help ourselves, we've also helped the world. And the world is a much better place in many respects because of what we've done with respect to technology. So I think, this is my guess, not a guess, it's actually better informed than that. The county leadership, in close partnership, and many of you are doing this already, most of you are, with your IT structure, but very importantly with your chief security officials and with security individuals who can help you from the private sector to understand exactly the differences between the various capabilities that you have on your systems today, so that you can continue to layer the kinds of technology that will give you the advantage to secure your system, so that in fact you can take care of your system, your citizens. Lots of folks want to buy an entire suite of capabilities, and I'm not here to make a sales pitch of some kind or another. The kinds of systems that acknowledge the reality of artificial intelligence now being brought to bear to create zero-day capabilities and polymorphic threats, the kinds of systems that acknowledge that artificial intelligence is at work against you, are, I think, where you ought to put your first emphasis. And if signature-based, which is a system which is able to recognize something we already knew about, but may not be able to recognize something that occurred 2 seconds ago because it was updated 5 minutes ago. Signature-based will get you to a point, but you probably want to look at a combination of capabilities. And you do this with your IT leadership, you do this with your security leadership, and you can do this in consultation with organizations and companies that have real expertise in this area. If you do this and you consult right, my guess would be, and people have called upon you for savings, you can actually protect yourself at a pretty good price. It doesn't break the bank, and that's really what's important. This message is all about how we protect each other as opposed to any particular product. So I would simply say it's a generation of protection that we all need to acknowledge has come our way. We need to acknowledge it and see how it can enhance what you already have on the system. We'll take one more. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
We have thousands and thousands of people that are attacking the United States with cybersecurity. And in your last comment, you said that we don't have a cyber cavalry unit and probably won't have one. Is that because we don't have young people who don't want to get into that area, or is there other reasons?
It is at this point an organizational decision that has not been made. What the Department of Homeland Security will do for us is it will help us to understand what the cyber threats are. It will notify us immediately. It's tied in very, very closely to our financial system. I think the sense would be that one of the earliest harbingers of a major, what Leon Panetta, our former Secretary of Defense, used to call the cyber Pearl Harbor that he says is coming. One of the earliest manifestations of that will be the systematic takedown of our financial sector. Happily, many of those companies are at the leading edge of cyber technology, and they're working that very hard. But the United States has not made the decision, and I'm not sure you want the United States to make the decision, to reach right down into your computer networks into the county and have it be tied directly to the federal area. Now, I think warning systems are fine. I think periodic updates on technologies that you should be considering is fine. But what we have where we have made our decisions with respect to the future is organizing a cyber command that gives us the ability to wage strategic cyber warfare if necessary in retribution, or if we have to lead with cyber warfare. That's a global capability. And we have our intelligence community as well that is constantly doing cyber analysis and, frankly, our own cyber reconnaissance. And they're not oriented down. They're not oriented down. The only people coming to help you are you. And I think that's an important outcome of a conversation like this. And when you think about in an ICU, in a hospital, how many devices just in an ICU that rely either on access to Wi-Fi or the internet, and what happens to every patient in the ICU if suddenly the entire network is taken down with a cyber attack? My blood would run cold, actually. So I think the point here is not to sow despair. The point here is we still got time. And an analysis at the county level of the kind of protection that you have today, given the threats that are occurring, and what you might want to invest in over the long term that is scalable, because not all counties are the same. Not all counties have the same amount of assets and resources and infrastructure. that is scalable, but also is teachable. That's the great advantage of a cognitive-based, AI-based cyber protection capability. It is trained constantly. And I will simply tell you that some of the products that are out there, they picked up WannaCry. Never seen it before. But it, as an artificial intelligence-based system, it stopped an unknown, unfamiliar inbound malware, did a DNA level analysis of the code, had seen some of that code before and didn't let it in. AI cognitive-based systems stopped Petya when the cyber-based, or rather the signature-based systems let it in the Ukraine. And frankly, there's large places in the Ukraine where the power's still out. So, it's a borderless world that can strike at the speed of light. And we just got to be ready. And that readiness can occur. But we have to be ready for it. We have to understand that the threat is out there. It's not a threat that's going to come tomorrow. It's a threat that may already be in your system, by the way. So it's worth thinking about, and that was my point today, was to thank you for all that you do every day for our precious citizens, but also to tell you that we're not leaping over mountains or rivers anymore. The enemy's with us. Yes, sir. This will be the last question. Yes, sir.
First of all, General, thank you for your service.
My honor. Thank you.
Given the fact that we might experience this cyber attack, whether it's localized or nationwide, should counties get into the business of being able to respond in the physical world to hospitals going down, to water systems going down, to sewer being dumped into freshwater supplies? Is that another responsibility we need to start thinking about?
Well, I would. And I'm not telling you you've got to respond across the board to those. But disaster response consequence management, which I think our counties have come light years in the last 2 decades, when the time comes to think your way through what would be called black swan scenarios, things that you just can't imagine that could have happened in your county, but the entire network has been taken down in the hospital, going through with the emergency services that scenario and having people to think about a couple of things. How do you respond? How do you take care of the patients in ICU? Who attempts immediately to restore the network? What are all the things that are necessary in a number of these scenarios in the event of a catastrophic cyber attack where you can restore service as quickly as you possibly can, obviously for public protection and public security of the citizens? And I can imagine tabletop exercises where you go through these scenarios. Very importantly is to get the cyber network back up and then to orchestrate the movement of the first responders in ways that can restore service as quickly as possible or reduce the effect of the cyber attack. I don't know that it requires new capabilities. I would propose that it requires that you think perhaps differently about the capabilities that you have. And then perhaps in the margins of the capabilities you have, what additional you might need in the margins in order to permit you to have capacity to respond across the board to all of these threats. That's probably what you'll find. You own much of it already, but it hasn't necessarily been focused on those particular issues. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today, and I wish you all the best. God bless you all. Thank you.